Sometimes I think back to like my grandparents and parents and how they worked, and it was almost like, don't complain, make sure you're available, say yes to everything, make sure you're committed. In fact, if anything, we were like glamorizing the overfunctioning and that burnout sort of side of things. Whereas now I think what we're starting to realize is we don't need to work harder, we need to work smarter because we can still achieve, but we can do it where well-being is part of that conversation and still plays a role in that as well.
Hello and welcome to the Plum Pod, where we talk about all things HR and mental health. I'm your host, Georgia, and founder of Access HR. In today's episode, I'm joined by Claire Burns, a mindset and performance coach, as we have a refreshingly real conversation about the current state of work in a modern world. In this conversation, we discuss the value of better understanding ourselves and how in turn that can make us more effective in our professional and personal lives. Claire, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining me.
No, thank you so much for inviting me here today.
And I know you've travelled, we've both travelled, we are Northern girls.
We are indeed.
And this is definitely going to be a great conversation because we are. But first of all, I always start with the same question. And the reason for that is I want to get to know more about you and I want our listeners to as well.
Yeah.
So the question is, was HR part of the plan or did this happen by chance?
To be fair, I think it definitely was part of the plan.
Oh my gosh.
It was. It absolutely.
Tell me more. I need to know.
It started in my very, very early career, that sort of Saturday job. And I just have always been so interested in people. And almost to the point where you probably say a bit nosy, just wanted to know a bit more about people, what makes them tick, what makes them, sort of happy. And I think that's always been a big space that I've wanted to get into. I got into HR. I don't think it was quite what I expected when I got into it. And I think there was areas of it which maybe I didn't enjoy as much. And then hence why then over the years, my career has developed off the back of that as well. So yes, intentional to get in. But as I say, I think I enjoyed more the proactive side of the HR rather than the reactive and the firefighting.
And what did you expect HR to be at that moment?
I thought it would all be positive, like in terms of...
God, I'd be
naively maybe.
Yeah.
But I think because I went in with such good intentions that I just wanted to help people and I wanted things to be better and to improve. But as I moved through different cultures, etc., I started to see that there's very different approaches to it. And I think I learned sometimes the hard way that, you really have to understand a company's culture. Because if you are then going to be the face of it, if you're going to be the one that's pushing it back out there, to the employees as well, you've really got to believe in it and you've got to think it's right in the approaches that they're taking as well. So, as I say, I think I learned the hard way that, that culture really, really does matter in my early career. But, thankfully, it's always at the forefront now.
Totally agree with that. And I think a lot of us as well have our own perception of HR compared to the reality. I also always get the question of, I want to move into HR. Can you give me a tip? And my biggest tip is you need to understand what HR actually is.
Yeah.
Because I don't think deep down we actually do understand when we first go into it.
Yeah.
Tell me more about you being in the HR space to then what led you to focusing more into the wellbeing remit.
Yeah, okay. So in my early career, I got to see really two camps, so one where wellbeing was very supported, you could see the practices, the processes, they were all aligned to ultimately supporting people and making people feel better and work better, perform better. So it was very much that holistic view on that. But then also on the other side of that, I saw what happened when it wasn't so well supported and the negative impacts of that, how that... one of the things that I saw a lot is that you realise it doesn't just stay with people at work, it then starts to bleed into personal lives and you start to see those people become more disconnected, disengaged, and generally impacting, their thoughts, their feelings, behaviours on a daily basis as well. And you could almost have that person that came in, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, eager, ready to go, and then within a few weeks, months within a business, they are a completely different person. And I think... for me, that was the area where I wanted to be in that proactive space where we taught people how to work well, and that we understood that it's not just on that individual, it's on us all in a business to be committed to that purpose as well. And for me, that's where I find that I'm really passionate about. I know disciplinaries and grievances and things like that do crop up, but I found that that didn't tap into my purpose and what made me happy at work. When I was focusing more on the wellbeing space, I think like my inner, sort of purpose shone through, and it was a passion area, and I was happy to get into those conversations with people who didn't believe in it either. So that's I always love those conversations, those challenges, when it's labelled as fluffy or it's not something that's going to be progressive, or where's the ROI on this. And
do you feel more fulfilled being in the wellbeing space now compared to HR in a traditional form?
Yes, most definitely. Definitely. Because I think when you lead with well-being and it's part of the conversation, I actually think it makes everything else a lot easier, because you've got people who are engaged, they're focused, they're motivated, they're passionate about their work. So then everything else almost falls into place. Whereas when I was in some of my early HR career, it was almost like we led with the other stuff first and then expected well-being just to be tagged on at the end. And I think it was that we had the wrong way around for a lot of times.
Which actually goes back to what you were saying about being more proactive, whereas that way of trying to do the HR first and crossing our fingers and hoping that we have then a wellbeing strategy as a fallout, it's not got that intentionality that I think a lot of organizations could actually really benefit from.
Yeah.
And you started to say just then, with well-being, it's about how we can work well and how we can work well together.
Yeah.
And I'd love if we could talk around ways of working.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is post-pandemic, I've definitely noticed a shift. And there are companies who have got their wow sorted, ways of working.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of companies that don't have their wow sorted. And I would just love, if anyone hasn't actually heard of this term before, how would you describe what ways of working is and why do we need it as organizations?
Yeah. So ways of working really are how you're showing up to work every day and how you are achieving those outputs. It's how you're managing your energy levels. It's also plays into, your thoughts, your feelings and behaviors. Are you leaving work completely overwhelmed, completely depleted, then leaving everyone in your personal life with a sort of like a half version of you because it's all coming home with you. And that's really what that is all about. And when we think about those ways of working, it's not about scaling back your ambition. I think the moment you say, we've got to prioritise well-being, everyone thinks, oh, right, okay, I just won't be ambitious then because I don't feel like those two worlds can come together. But you're right, I think there's been a big shift now. And I think people are wanting to still be successful, but they're not prepared to enter the hustle culture for it. And I think that's what people are saying is, I am ambitious. I'm not prepared to scale it back. But what I do want is to work in a way which is sustainable. Because what we tend to see, and I think particularly, if you go into a high level or you're a business owner, you will adopt ways of, you will try and achieve success at any means, and then you start to compromise on so many things that keep you well in the pursuit of that success. And so now I think a lot more people are saying, that may have been in the old world. Sometimes I think back to like my grandparents and parents and how they worked, and it was almost like, don't complain, make sure you're available, say yes to everything, make sure you're committed. In fact, if anything, we were like glamorizing the overfunctioning and that burnout sort of side of things. Whereas now I think what we're starting to realize is we don't need to work harder, we need to work smarter because we can still achieve. But we can do it where well-being is part of that conversation and still plays a role in that as well.
Completely agree. And when we were thinking about this conversation, I was actually researching into what is the future in terms of ways of working. And I actually think it's more around like micro boundaries, like what are the moments that really matter within an organization and how can we hyper focus on those? Because there's a lot of, what I'm noticing a lot at the moment is actually doing things for the sake of doing it because it used to work in the old world, as you just referred to.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of organizations are still trying to refer back to their pre-pandemic ways.
Yeah.
When the reality is the pandemic has happened and a lot of us have reevaluated life and what's important to us and what do we want to get out of our careers, I think is a really
pivotal point. I know for me personally, I started my consultancy during the pandemic because I wanted more for my life. That then came with, how do I want to work? What does that look like? And how can I get that fulfillment? And for anybody listening, how would you recommend how they can start to understand that for themselves?
Yeah, I think it's very much tapping into your personal desires. I think too often, I think we just put ourselves last and our needs last, hence why we see a lot of like people pleasing. We don't see boundaries in place. And actually, I think you've just got to get really honest with yourself and say, you know, we've got one shot at this. We can either work for 40 years, be absolutely miserable, have that same attitude every Monday morning when someone says, oh, it's work this week. Oh, yeah, work. And then someone says, how's work been? Well, it's work, isn't it? And have that sort of really negative outlook on it. Or we can really say, this is what I want from my job. And this is how I'm going to go after it and get it as well. And I think so really it's tapping into that personal desire and stop ignoring that inner voice that's saying that this isn't working for me anymore. And I think we are starting to see more people willing to make that change. I just think we need to advocate for it a lot more. And I think a big part of this is advocating for yourself. I don't see it enough. I see too many people sat in systems waiting to be rescued. So, and that is part of the problem. You know, if you've got the client who, you know, puts in that last minute request and you work all night to deliver it, they're not going to question that. If you've got the manager who knows that they can lean on you and you'll always go, yeah, I'll do it, they're not going to question that. So if we don't advocate for ourselves, then people are benefiting from us staying quiet in a system that benefits them. So this is where we've got to think, if we don't advocate for ourselves, nothing will change.
I think it's so important what you just said then around boundaries at the same time and being our own advocates. I definitely learned this in my career. Nobody else is going to change it for me. It all comes down to me and putting myself forward. I am responsible for my future. I'm responsible for building that entirely new door and then knocking it down.
Yeah.
But you started to talk then around people pleasing. And as you said, I was nodding and smiling because a lot of us can really feel that, especially within the HR space. And it does make me question whether people pleasing does actually impact us personally and professionally. Have you noticed any of that?
Oh, most definitely. I think, you know, work and life anyway, I think it's becoming more blurred, isn't it? So, and I think, so that's harder. But with people pleasing as well, that, you know, often it is a coping mechanism for things, whether it's like low self-worth, it's, you know, sort of our ability to show how committed we are. And then, as we say, it's almost it's that self-care. It's that, you know, our needs are always going last. There's always going to be a personal cost every time we do that. And you're right, it does show up in our professional lives as well as our personal lives as well. So, and I think we have to be careful because short term, we might think it's okay, but longer term, you know, we're going to start to feel the cost of that as well.
And what could that cost look like for us?
I think you end up overcommitting. You are sort of leading yourself down a path where you're going to burn out as well. I think what that does is it teaches ourselves that we aren't important because I've got to be driven by everyone else's needs and not my own. You know, I've worked with a number of high achievers because it often appears in sort of high achievers because we want to get ahead, we want to be successful, so we'll do that at any cost. But what happens is then they're saying, I don't have enough time to do my work. But actually, what happens in your working day is you are meeting everyone else's needs and not your own. So that means that then you're having to catch up on your workload in the evening because you've given your time and energy to everyone else just because they've instantly demanded it of you. And then hence why then we get in these really negative cycles as well.
And then equally with what you're just saying then, if we are serving everybody else, as you say, we serve ourselves last.
Yeah.
We then serve ourselves in the evening. It then bleeds into our personal lives or our weekend. And then we feel in that constant rat race that is the corporate world that is never ending. I think we're struggling to find that balance between the two, but also that isn't a way to be productive.
No, absolutely not. But I think we are so conditioned into it. I think even like with people pleasing, I think it's praised in organisations. I think it is something that's seen as, oh, look at them always going that extra mile. And it's almost...
I can count on them.
Yeah, you know, 11 o'clock, I'll email them, they'll reply back to me. And I think are you not questioning why they're on their emails at 11? And that's what we should be spinning the narrative around. And I think, as I say, it's almost when people benefit from you being that way, they're not going to call that behavior out. Why would they? Because they're benefiting from that. So again, it is about that self-advocacy piece. And we have to just think about, am I doing that harm to myself as well? Don't get me wrong, there are environments which are very toxic and we've got to think about how to keep ourselves well in those. But I always think the worst place to be is to sit in silence. Because people will say to me, well, what if I speak up and nothing changes? And I think, but nothing may change, but what you've gathered there is insight, and that insight gives you power to make a decision for you, which is best for you moving forward. So are you going to sit here and in 2 years still be saying the same thing, or are you going to go and find an employer that values someone who puts boundaries in place, for example?
I love that. That's such an important message because none of us are stuck. We are not stuck to that employer, that environment, that particular seat. There is a lot of choice in life. And I know the market is particularly tough, especially at the time when we're recording this podcast. But we should all feel fulfilled in our careers. Yeah. And then this is also where, for any employers who are taking interest in this conversation, make sure you've got an environment where you can stimulate people to have personal and professional lives. Emma Greed actually spoke about this recently on a podcast, and she said that work-life balance is a personal responsibility, not your employer.
Yes.
Which I think very nicely actually goes back to what we're saying. We've got our own voices. It's how we use them that can be very powerful to our careers.
Yeah.
And it's not just waiting for somebody else to come and talk to us.
Yeah.
Using our initiative a lot more.
Yeah.
And we're not going to be penalised for that. And if we are, that's not the right environment.
Yeah, it is. It's the data and the insight you need to say, then if they're not going to respond to this well, then that gives me the push to move to somewhere who will.
Before we went on to that, ever so slightly, you were talking about burnout. And I really want to focus on that, especially with the post-pandemic era and any work that you're noticing with your clients as part of your work at the moment. When clients are talking to you about burnout, is there any indication around stress or any mention of stress that is also coming part and parcel?
Yeah, I think, well, to be fair, I think burnout feels quite a scary term to use. And I think people don't want to be seen as they are burnout. I think that there's a lot of stigma around that word because I think people interpret it quite a lot as, people are saying I can't cope or, I'm not resilient, etc. But what I am seeing with the stress conversation is that, people are starting to misuse it as well. What we've got to realise is not all stress is bad for us. We've got our use stress, which is very good. If we can get into that optimal zone, we can use it to really enhance our performance and drive us forward as well. But where we get into those sort of high arousal states with stress and then it becomes chronic, then we are on that slippery slope to burnout as well. So in a lot of the roles that we do, pressure is part of it and stress is part of it. But if we work in ways which are conducive to supporting our well-being, we're giving ourselves more mental bandwidth. So we've got more ability to lean into actually, can I pay attention now to how I'm thinking, feeling and behaving? Am I starting to go into a bit of a spiral or a direction that I don't like? When we're not constantly in reactive mode and in overfunctioning and, sort of that heightened state, we've got that ability to reflect and actually say, right, I need to do something different now because I can feel myself moving into that trajectory. The problem we see a lot with burnout is that the sense is it does creep up on people because people are just not noticing all these signs that are starting to come in for them as well because of the way that we're set up to work is go, 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 keep going, keep pushing, keep powering through. So you never have that time to really sit back and reflect until it hits you all in one go. And then, before you know it, you are at that complete burnout stage. You've moved beyond what's considered manageable stress. You've moved into chronic stress and you've gone way beyond that as well.
We had an episode specifically on burnout.
All right, yeah.
And what I loved from it is we can start to identify those triggers ourselves, but the really hard pieces, no one can come to us with a piece of paper that's got that list of signs.
No.
Because it shows up differently on each of us, which I think is what makes it really hard. At the same time, like I've been through moments of burnout I can say that now on reflection, but in the moment, I would have never used that term.
No, because it's almost the red flags are going up, but we're trying to explain them away for different things. Oh, well, it's a busy season. Oh, I'm bound to feel like this. I'll just keep pushing through. So we almost try and keep excusing them as well until the point where we then just can't ignore them because we've gone into absolute exhaustion stages as well. So, yeah, it's hard, isn't it? I think with burnout and sort of being honest with yourself, because I think there's so much stigma around the honesty piece. You know, if I put my hand up to my employer and say I'm struggling, I'm going to get, you know, those disapproving looks. People are going to judge me for that. I'm meant to be leading a team and meant to be holding it all together. But what we forget behind each of our job roles is that we are all human. No one is immune from developing high levels of stress. No one is immune from developing, developing burnout. What we've got to see is where is someone's current state? And how do we help as employers through ways of working, help them improve that? And that is where, you know, we need to get to when it comes to ways of working.
And it's interesting, actually, when talking about stress, because we all have been stressed at one point in our lives, 100%. But this is where it's really unfortunate to see, because actually 44% of employees are considering leaving because of stress, which is huge.
Massive, yeah.
But what practical steps can we take to try and reduce that stress?
Yeah, I think definitely we need to pay attention to ourselves first. I think, you know, like we, you know, just sort of mentioning there about the, you know, those signs that are starting to develop. I think any way in which your thoughts, feelings and behaviours are starting to move into a more negative transition, you need to pay attention to it. You need to not ignore it and hope it'll go away on its own. When we, you know, in a lot of my training, I talk about the mental health continuum and that sort of how we move between, you know, mental wellness to mental illness as well. And there is a transition process. But where we often see in employers in the workplace as well is that we tend to ignore the early warning signs, both as from an employer, but also from ourselves as well. And so really what we've got to be thinking about is, one, pay attention to ourselves and really, you know, hone in on how am I actually feeling today, doing those regular check-ins. Am I, you know, feeling it a bit more today? Is things balanced off a bit more? So really paying attention to that. I also think in terms of way we are working is looking at, you know, can we get into deep focus time? I think we are terrible, I think, as a nation to try and multitask. And when our focus is split between so many different things, you end up feeling like you accomplish nothing. So it's, you know, that single task, that deep focus and those regular breaks. I think we need to get better at taking rest, you know, and switching off. Sometimes, well, what I find, as I say, a lot that's worked for me is ritualizing my morning and my end routine. So really helping your brain switch out of those different modes as well. You know, so we're gearing up to work. You know, worst thing you can do is get up in the morning, check your work emails, because you've already set yourself off then, haven't you? Whereas actually you might not be starting work officially for 2 hours, but you're already in that mindset of thinking. Prioritising your workload. I think we often think we have to tackle every single thing on our to-do list every single day and then get almost disheartened by the end of the day if you haven't. Focus on progress, not perfection. I think, you know, we can be quite tendency to fall into perfectionist traps. You know, often 80% is enough. Stop giving the extra 20% that doesn't move anything forward, but it leaves you working till 10 o'clock at night. So I think it's just starting to look at those ways, but don't overcommit yourself. I think it's start small and allow the momentum to build. I think a lot of things fall down because everyone tries to tackle everything in one go. And then they're like, oh, it don't work. It doesn't work anyway. Whereas actually start small and just keep building through consistent application every day and see it as a daily commitment to yourself, not just, I've got my holiday in 10 weeks or whatever, you know, and just thought I'll just keep going till that point. Amount of people, when we were talking earlier about, you know, personal life as well, are so revved off the clock that by the time it gets to the holiday, they can't even relax because they are just like off the scale because they've not done it consistently throughout that time. And then we're like wishing our lives away, like, oh, it's only 2 weeks, 3 weeks till that next holiday or that next break. And it's not the way that we should be operating.
And most people now that I speak to are still working whilst they're on holiday.
Yeah.
They will do a handover to their team and be like, well, I'm only in France, I'm contactable. And I'm like, no,
you're not.
no, you're not. Like, that is the whole purpose of annual leave and that detachment. It's not for you to be contactable.
No, yeah.
It's to have that break.
Yeah.
I hear it all the time, actually, where people are like, I'm going away in 3 months. It will be fine. I'm like, no.
Yeah.
That's a long time to go. And you were talking a little bit around everything feeling like a must do.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing that changed for me is when I would ask people, is it urgent or is it important?
Yeah.
And they'd go, well, actually, it's just important. I'm like, great.
Yeah.
You've made my day so much easier than how it used to be. I'm also just thinking as I'm sat here when you're talking, like, how can we as employers start to help with this transition? Because I'm thinking, is it us as individuals, or is it how we could reposition with collaborative work design that needs to be looked at? Like, is it us as individual contributors in an organization, or is it actually how we're designing collaboration internally that's adding to those moments of stress?
Yeah. I think it needs to be. So, yes, I think we have to advocate for ourselves. I think that's an important part. But what we also need is employers to be open to those conversations, and as well to call out those unhealthy behaviours as well, because I think, if you are seeing that people are emailing at all hours, etc., doing all these quite unhealthy ways of working, we need to say that's not what we're expecting of you, because I think a lot of the time the perception as well is that is the expectation. And we internalize that as well. So we need to make sure that we're not putting those extra pressures on ourselves, but we also need the employer to meet us as well. So if I raise my hand and say to you, I'm really stressed, I'm overwhelmed, I don't want my manager to come back to me and say, well, aren't we all? And I'm still here doing my job. Thank you for that very unhelpful response.
Yeah.
But it happens because it becomes a competition, but because then that manager is then also working in ways that aren't healthy as well. So what we've got to see is we really need to get people role modeling the good behaviour. We need to get them to call out the behaviour that isn't the expectation of the organisation and it's not working in healthy ways. And then we need to start thinking about our job design and think, how can we give people more reflective time? How can we ensure that people have times of recovery and more focus and more clarity, more autonomy, and how can we help build these into their working day so that actually it helps them in terms of how they work as well. I've got a client as well who, they have seasons of high stress, often sale seasons, around Christmas, etc. But what they are very good at is they will talk about that very openly, and they'll say, right, guys, we're going to go into a stressful period. We know that, but what we want you to do is keep communicating with us, and what we've got to do is pull together as a team. So if you've got any capacity, share that out with others and vice versa, and let's work as a team to this. And then when that sale period ends, then what we're going to do is make sure that we activate that really good recovery period for us all as well. So it's not we're expecting you to work up here and then continue for the rest of the year. They recognise the demands of the business, but then they also allow that come down time as well for people to come down from that and then offer that more support as well. But that's understanding your business, your demands, how that makes people feel in the moment. I always think, if a leader stood up and admitted we're going to go through a stressful period, that validates that for so many people if they are starting to feel that, but then they know they can articulate it and they can get the support for how to deal with it during those times as well.
And the first question I was going to ask there was, who's leading it? Because it makes me think we need to have the buy-in from a lot of people within the organisation for something like that to work, where you then do go into the recovery period and people are like, okay, I actually can acknowledge and absorb this recovery rather than go.
Yeah.
So who leads it?
So what we need those in the leadership positions to be advocating for that as well, and role modeling it as well, showing their vulnerability to those situations as well. I think it makes you come across more human, rather than this person that's constantly put together and not struggling. And I think, it is keeping that connection piece there, but it has to be role modeled from that senior level as well. And then naturally that's going to start to filter down. And be prepared to have those conversations about stress. Don't see it as someone's weaker because they're feeling it. We've all got different vulnerability levels. There's no right or wrong way. But if we are open to those conversations, we're role modeling it and we're advocating that we give people support around it, that's going to send out the right message as well.
Let's say we have someone who's listening who is thinking, right, Claire, I love it, but I've overstepped the boundaries. I've allowed that 10 p.m. email. I have responded within 0.2 seconds because I thought that would be the best thing to show I'm online. How can they start to kind of claw that back a little bit whilst having the boundaries, but not being perceived as being unable to do their job? Because I think that's the scariest thing.
Oh, yes, definitely. And I also think with boundaries, people worry that they're going to be seen as difficult.
Yes.
Like, they're going to think I'm just not being, a team player, or I'm not willing to help people. So for me, it is very much always start small with everything, because I think if you go gun-ho at it, you are probably going to shock a load of people who've relied on the fact you haven't had good boundaries in place, and you are going to get that conflict and that pushback. So I always think, remember your why. Boundaries are an internal mechanism for sort of saying there's an internal need in there that's not being met, and this is why you want that boundary in place. So remember the why. Remember, boundaries about sustainability. They are going to let you show up continually in a good way. That is what the boundaries are for. They're not to be confrontational, they're to be directional. So, whether that's with a client, your line manager, maybe a direct report to you, it's not you always saying, no, I'm not doing that. That might be, yes, I know that you need my help right now, but if you just give me a little bit of time, I can come and look at that with you in an hour, 2 hours, tomorrow, whenever, whatever time frame you want to put on that. And I think that is a big part of that. And it doesn't have to be an argument. I think people think, rather than have a difficult conversation, I'll just do it myself, or I'll take it on. But what we need to realise is it's not about you being difficult. It doesn't have to be a confrontation. Yes, they may feel a bit uncomfortable at first because you may have been a people pleaser, or you may have been in an environment that rewards that overwork. But what we've got to think is, in the long run, you will gain from putting those boundaries in place. And I always think, try and look at your boundaries as hard boundaries and soft boundaries. So your hard boundaries these are my non-negotiables. Focus on them first. And then our softer ones are more our aspirational ones. So even if you just start with one hard boundary first and think, right, that's what I'm going to lead with first, and then see how that goes. It will be a bit of trial and error. There will be some people unhappy because, as we say, they've probably benefited from you not having your boundaries. So it is about just keeping that momentum, but always keep that why in mind. That is an internal need that I need meeting, and I'm going to keep that need at the forefront.
I love that. And I wish I'd have had that lesson a lot earlier in my career, because I didn't have any boundaries. Like, I was just, I thought saying yes to everything would mean that people had respect for me. But I actually realised by having boundaries that actually delivered more respect, because it showed like clarity and also confirmation of what I was working on. Whereas I was in the mix of, I'd be doing something, someone would ask a question, oh, Georgia, are you free? Yeah, sure. And then I would go away from each task. Like, it actually didn't make me a good professional at all.
Yeah.
Claire, I only have one more question for you.
Yes.
This is flown. But the question, it's a real reflexive question.
Yeah.
And it's looking back on the start of your career. So if you could talk to your younger self, what is one piece of advice that you would give?
I think mine would be the boundary piece as well, is to make sure that you have them in place from the get-go. This is what I wish we really taught when people entered the workplace, is that, to know your worth, know what your needs are, and make sure that you never sort of compromise on those. moving forward. And I certainly wish I didn't have to have learnt the hard way some of that. But as you say, all a lesson. But, you know, I think that would be the piece of advice, is that, you know, don't ever put your needs to the bottom of the pile, because we get one life. We're here to live it. And we have to, when we are working, it's about enjoying that work as well.
Super powerful message. Absolutely love it. And I think for anybody who has gone through this episode, I think a big piece on our why is really important, and we can only start from there. So thank you so much, Claire. I've loved it.
Oh, no, thank you so much for having me.
Like this episode? Click here for more HR talk. And if you're just catching up, check out our previous episodes right here.